My mother stood on my porch, holding a gift basket, and told me my adopted son wasn't blood. For a decade, I had swallowed their poison with a polite smile. But in that moment, I didn't cry. I prepared for a funeral theirs. My name is Eleanor, and for 10 years, I let my family chip away at my son's spirit with 1,000 tiny cuts. They thought I was the gentle, yielding daughter who had strayed from their perfect blueprint. They were wrong. When they tried to land the final, devastating blow erasing my son from our family's legacy in ink and parchment, they didn't realize I was the one holding the match. What I did next didn't just burn a bridge, it salted the earth where it once stood, ensuring nothing would ever grow there again. It all started with a promise I whispered into a mess of dark curls 10 years ago. Leo was 6 when he came into my life, a little boy with eyes that held the solemn weight of the world and a sketchbook that was his only real shield. He wasn't born from me, but he was born for me. The night I officially became his mother, I held his small hand and swore to him, and to myself, that he would never again feel like he was on the outside looking in. I promised him a fortress of love so strong that no one, not even the family I came from, could ever breach its walls. I was a fool to think that my family, the prestigious Whitmores of Connecticut, would ever stop testing the defenses. They saw him not as their grandson, but as my charitable project, an anomaly in their pristine bloodline. It's an exhausting, lonely battle, trying to shield a child from the very people who are supposed to love them unconditionally. And if you're watching this right now and you know exactly what that fight feels like, tap that like button so I know I'm not alone in this. That fortress I promised him? It was about to face the ultimate siege. That siege I mentioned wasn't a single, loud declaration of war. It was quieter, more insidious. For a decade, it was a war of whispers, of polite smiles that never reached the eyes, and of gestures that were perfectly calibrated to say, "You do not belong here." My sister, Beatrice, was the master of this subtle cruelty. She was the daughter who did everything right, married a banker, produced 2 perfect heirs, and never once colored outside the pristine lines my parents had drawn. She'd look at Leo's latest painting, a stunning piece of art that pulsed with a talent far beyond his years, and say, "It's just wonderful how you encourage his little hobbies, Eleanor." So therapeutic for a boy with his background. The poison was always sweetened with condescension. My mother was no better. For Leo's 12th birthday, after he'd spent a month painting a breathtaking watercolor of her prize-winning garden roses, she accepted it with a thin, polite smile. She called it charming, then it vanished, never to be seen on the family gallery wall where my nephew's crude crayon drawings were framed in gold. These weren't mistakes, they were messages. They were the 1,000 tiny cuts designed to bleed him of his confidence, to remind him that he was, and always would be, an outsider. It's the kind of cruelty you can't call out without looking hysterical, because on the surface, it's all so painfully civil. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone smiling to your face, let me know in the comments which number describes you. 1 if it was family, 2 if it was at work, or 3 if it was somewhere else you were supposed to feel safe. And that civility was the mask they wore right before they brought out the guillotine. The guillotine fell on a crisp October afternoon. The occasion was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, a gilded spectacle of champagne and string quartets held at the Oak Knoll Country Club. It was less a celebration of love and more a display of Whitmore endurance and influence. Leo, now 16 and looking achingly uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo, was navigating the sea of polite, inspecting glances with his usual quiet dignity. He'd learned to make himself small at these events, to exist in the margins. But that day, they decided the margins weren't far enough. My father, with a grand flourish, announced that the photographer was ready for the official Whitmore legacy portrait. It was to be the centerpiece of the event, a timeless image of the family line, destined for the wall of their mahogany-paneled library. My parents seated themselves on 2 throne-like chairs, and Beatrice arranged her perfect family around them. Just as I was about to guide Leo into the frame, my sister glided over, her silk dress whispering across the Persian rug. She placed a manicured, ice-cold hand on my arm. "Eleanor, darling," she murmured, her voice a conspiratorial hush. "This one is just for for posterity. The bloodline, you know. For the archives." She glanced at Leo, who was standing right there, and gave him a smile that was all teeth. He can just wait in the foyer. It'll only be a moment. She said bloodline as if it were a sacred text, a word that had the power to include and, with a single utterance, to utterly annihilate. And in that perfectly lit, opulent room, I felt the ground beneath me crack open. I don't remember making a scene. I don't remember the drive home on the Merritt Parkway, only the blur of headlights and the suffocating silence inside my car. The weight of my sister's words, the bloodline, filled every inch of space between us. Leo sat staring out the passenger window, his reflection a pale, stoic mask against the dark Connecticut landscape. He hadn't said a word since we left, and his silence was louder than any scream. We were almost home when he finally spoke, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. "Mom?" he asked, still looking at the road ahead. If I had their blood, would they want me in the picture then? The question was delivered with a chilling calmness, not with self-pity, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist confirming a painful hypothesis. And that question wasn't a dagger. It was a demolition ball. It crashed through the fortress I thought I'd built, shattering a decade of my own patient excuses and carefully managed denials. In his simple, devastating question, I saw the truth. I hadn't been protecting him from them. I had been forcing him to stand in the line of fire, armed with nothing but my futile hope that one day they would see the grandson, not the exception. That hope died on the highway that night, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The war was no longer about defense. It was about to become an offense. This is for every parent watching. What would you do when your own child asks a question that reveals a truth so ugly you can no longer pretend it isn't there? Comment fight below if you would burn it all down for them, or fix if you believe there's still a way to mend things. I really need to know what you would have done. The first shot in my quiet war wasn't fired with a cannon, but with a click of a mouse. 2 weeks after the anniversary debacle, a lavishly embossed invitation arrived for the annual Whitmore Thanksgiving retreat at our family's estate in the Berkshires. It was a sacred tradition, a 3-day affair of catered meals, skeet shooting, and passive-aggressive commentary over brandy. For years, I had dutifully packed our bags, plastering a smile on my face while inwardly steeling myself and Leo for the ordeal. It was the price of admission to the family, or so I had told myself. This time, the invitation felt less like an olive branch and more like a summons for my surrender. Attached was a link to a digital RSVP, a modern concession my mother had grudgingly made. In previous years, I would have replied with a lengthy, overly cheerful note about how excited we were to come. This year, I logged on, navigated to the event page, and saw 2 names listed under my household, Eleanor Vance and Leo Vance. I hovered the cursor over the response options. There was no room for explanation, no box for nuance. Just a simple choice. I clicked regrets for both of us. No text message to my sister, no phone call to my mother with a carefully crafted excuse about a sudden scheduling conflict. Just a cold, digital number. It was a small act of defiance, a single click in the vast emptiness of the internet, but it felt like I had just pulled the pin from a grenade. I closed the laptop and felt the first, unfamiliar tremor of peace. The grenade was rolling, and I had no intention of stopping it. I knew the silence on my end would be far more deafening to them than any angry tirade. They expected me to fight for a seat at their table. They never imagined I would simply choose to walk away from it. The silence that followed my RSVP lasted for exactly 27 hours. I counted. It was the calm before the storm, the eerie quiet before the Whitmore machine of concern and correction whirred to life. The first text was from Beatrice, dripping with feigned sweetness. "Everything okay? Saw you guys can't make it to Thanksgiving. Hope Leo isn't sick." She wasn't asking if my son was well. She was asking why I was daring to step out of line. The question was a velvet-gloved accusation. I ignored it. An hour later, my mother called. I let it ring. She called again. I let it ring. The third time, I answered, bracing myself. "Eleanor," she began, her voice tight with practiced disappointment. "I simply don't understand this. Thanksgiving is our most important family tradition. What am I supposed to tell everyone? You're punishing your father and me over one silly photograph." It was a misunderstanding. The gaslighting was immediate and potent. My pain was a misunderstanding. My reaction was a punishment. My son's dignity was less important than her social convenience. I didn't argue. I just calmly said, "We won't be there," and ended the call. The final volley came that evening, a voicemail from my father, his voice as cold and hard as granite. "Eleanor, your mother is distraught. This theatrical display of emotion is unbecoming. Whatever slight you imagine has occurred, you are allowing it to overshadow your duty to this family. Call me when you are ready to be rational." Each message, each call, was just another bar being added to the cage I had just escaped from. They weren't trying to understand. They were trying to manage my rebellion. As the days ticked down to Thanksgiving, the messages from my family grew more desperate, then more demanding. They still thought it was a negotiation. They couldn't grasp that I wasn't asking for better terms of surrender. I had already declared my independence. The constant barrage of texts and voicemails had one unintended effect. They solidified in my mind that simply not going wasn't enough. Leaving a void where our tradition used to be would only give their phantom disappointment more power. I had to replace the poison with an antidote. So, I decided to host my own Thanksgiving. Friendsgiving. I went into my kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and started a guest list. It wasn't long, but it was solid. I invited Maria, my colleague from the town library, who always asked to see Leo's latest work. I invited the Chens from next door, who brought us soup when we had the flu last winter without ever being asked. I invited Mr. Holloway, Leo's high school art teacher, a man who saw my son's talent not as a therapeutic hobby but as a powerful gift. I even invited a couple of my own friends from college who lived a few towns over. These were the people who had seen us, the real us, all along. They were our bloodline, the one we had chosen, forged in shared laughter and quiet support, not in a name printed on a trust fund. It's amazing how walking away from a toxic tradition opens up space for a beautiful new one. Wherever you are right now, I want you to think about this. If you could create your own perfect holiday, what would it look like? Dream a little and share one detail in the comments below. The plan was simple: no fine china, no seating charts, just a feast of gratitude with the people who actually felt like home. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and my small Vermont home was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the oven. Laughter bounced off the walls, a chaotic symphony of multiple conversations blending with the soulful sounds of a jazz station. My mismatched chairs were filled with the people I had chosen, and Leo was in the center of it all, excitedly explaining the composition of his latest piece to Mr. Holloway. He wasn't on the margins here, he was the main event. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, began to buzz. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Finally, during a lull in conversation, I glanced over. A notification from the Whitmore family group chat. Beatrice had posted a photo, the whole family gathered around a perfectly set dining table, smiling brittle, polished smiles for the camera. The caption read, "So much to be thankful for. Missing a few faces, but profoundly grateful for the family that chose to be here." It was a performance for an audience of one. A perfectly curated tableau of familial bliss, designed to highlight my absence like a missing tooth in a perfect smile. When I didn't respond, the calls began. First my mother, then my father, then Beatrice. My screen lit up with their names, a frantic, desperate light show. I looked at the phone, then back at my living room, at Leo laughing, his face open and happy. I pressed the silence button on the side of my phone. In that moment, watching their digital panic, I realized they weren't mourning my absence. They were furious at my insubordination. I hadn't broken their hearts, I had broken their rules. I had ruined their perfect picture. And for the Whitmores, that was the far greater crime. After I silenced my phone, I didn't turn it back on for the rest of the night. The digital storm could rage on without me. Inside my house, there was only peace. I woke up the next morning not to the usual post-holiday emotional hangover, but to the sun streaming into a wonderfully messy kitchen. There were wine glasses on the counter, a stack of mismatched containers filled with leftovers, and the faint, lingering scent of sage and cinnamon. It was the beautiful wreckage of a joyful celebration. Leo came downstairs a little while later, his sketchbook in hand, and we stood in the quiet kitchen eating cold slices of pumpkin pie for breakfast. He was quiet for a few minutes, then he looked up at me, a small, genuine smile on his face. "You know," he said softly, "that was the first Thanksgiving where I didn't feel like I had to hold my breath the whole time. And that was it. That was everything. For 16 years, I had confused obligation with love and tension with tradition. I had dragged my son into an emotional war zone every holiday, telling both of us that the knot in our stomachs was normal, that this was simply what family felt like. But it wasn't. This was. This quiet morning, the comfortable mess, the freedom to breathe. We hadn't lost a family tradition. We had finally found what it felt like to be home. It's a strange thing to realize the place you called home was actually the place you felt the most lost. It's a little before 5 p.m. on a Saturday for me here, a perfect time for reflection. I'm curious, what does home feel like to you, in one word? Share that one word in the comments. I'd love to read what it means to all of you. The 2 weeks after Thanksgiving were blissfully silent. I had blocked their numbers, muted the group chat, and created a bubble of peace for myself and Leo. For the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own life, not just reacting to theirs. I should have known that people who have always had power do not relinquish it gracefully. The doorbell rang on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Leo was upstairs, working on his college application portfolio, and I was curled up with a book. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find them standing on my porch, my parents. A gleaming black Lincoln Navigator, impossibly large and out of place, idled at the curb of my quiet Vermont street. My mother, Genevieve, was dressed in impeccable cashmere, holding a ridiculously ornate gourmet food basket wrapped in cellophane and tied with a gold ribbon. My father stood behind her, his arms crossed, his face a mask of impatient disapproval. "Eleanor, darling," my mother said, forcing a bright, brittle smile. "We were in the area and thought we'd stop by. We've been so worried." She tried to press the basket into my hands, a clear attempt to breach the doorway. "Can we come in? Just for a minute." My response was quiet, but it landed with the force of a slammed door. "Number." The smile on my mother's face faltered. My father's jaw tightened. "Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor," he snapped. "We are your parents." My mother tried again, her voice taking on a gentler, more condescending tone. "Honey, we know this has been hard, but he'll be off to college soon, and then what? You'll be all alone. We're the ones who will still be here." Then she delivered the line they had come to deliver, the poison they'd been holding back for a decade. "He isn't. Of us," she said softly, as if doing me a favor. "He's not blood, Eleanor. He's not blood." The words just hung there in the cold November air. For a decade, that was the unspoken truth. The ghost in every room, the subtext to every backhanded compliment. And there it was, finally given a voice. But in that moment, I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel sad. All I felt was a sudden, absolute clarity, as if a blinding fog had finally lifted. I looked at my mother's perfectly made-up face, at my father's stony expression, and I saw them for what they were. Strangers. Strangers with my eyes, my hair, but strangers nonetheless. I let out a slow breath. "Blood," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You talk about blood as if it grants you some kind of magical access to love and loyalty. Look at us. We share blood, and all you've ever given me is a list of conditions. That boy upstairs, the one who isn't of you, taught me what unconditional love feels like." I pointed at the basket in my mother's hands. "You show up here with that collection of expensive jams and crackers, and you think it's a key? It's not. It's a bill for services I am no longer providing." I took a step back. "Leo is my family. He is my heart. You two are just my relatives. And you are no longer welcome here. Leave." I didn't wait for a response. I closed the door softly, deliberately, and I turned the deadbolt. The click echoed in the sudden silence of my hallway, the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a prison door locking, but I was the one on the free side. There's a moment when you have to choose between the family you were born into and the peace you deserve. It is the hardest door you will ever close. If you've ever had to make that choice, just type the word "closed" in the comments. It's a quiet salute to everyone brave enough to turn that lock. The silence that followed the day I closed the door was different. It wasn't the silence of peace, It was the eerie, strategic silence of a retreating army regrouping for a different kind of attack. They couldn't break down my front door, so they decided to poison the well instead. The attack came a week later, not as a direct confrontation, but as a forwarded email. My cousin Robert, who had always been the most decent of the bunch, sent it to me with a simple subject line. Thought you should see this. The email was from Beatrice, sent to the entire extended Whitmore family aunts, uncles, cousins from coast to coast. It was a masterpiece of character assassination disguised as a cry for help. It began. I'm writing to you all with a heavy heart about Eleanor. She painted a picture of me as a fragile, unstable woman who had been completely manipulated by a troubled, opportunistic teenager. She wrote of my obsession and my increasingly erratic behavior. She implied Leo was a bad influence, that he had isolated me from my family for his own gain, and that my decision to cut them off was not a choice but a symptom of a breakdown. It was vile, and it was brilliant. Because it was all wrapped in the sickeningly sweet language of sisterly concern, it made anyone who defended me look like they were attacking a worried sibling. The fallout was immediate. Texts started trickling in from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My great-aunt Carol from Florida wrote, "Dearest, Beatrice told us you're having a hard time. Please remember, blood is thicker than water. Don't let a difficult phase with a teenager make you forget who your real family is. They weren't just attacking me, they were trying to erase my reality, rewriting history with me as the villain." For about an hour after reading Beatrice's email and the text that followed, I felt a white-hot rage. I wanted to call every single one of them and scream. But then, a different feeling settled in. A cold, quiet resolve. My sister had chosen the battlefield and the weapon words. Fine, I was done being a pacifist. I spent that evening not crying, but curating. I went through 10 years of digital history on my laptop, my own private archive of slights. I screenshotted Beatrice's text about Leo's therapeutic hobby. I transcribed my father's voicemail telling me to be rational. I found the photo of the insulting young man's guide to corporate success's book they gave my artistic son for Christmas. I found the original invitation for the 50th anniversary, the one that mentioned the legacy portrait. I gathered every polite, dismissive, soul-crushing little piece of evidence I had unknowingly collected over the years. I compiled it all into a single, cleanly formatted PDF file. No angry commentary, no emotional pleading, just the facts, laid out in chronological order under the simple heading, The Whitmore Record. Then I opened Beatrice's original, poisonous email, and I hit reply all. My own message was brief. You have all received a narrative that paints me as unstable and my son as manipulative. That is one version of the story. Attached, you will find the evidence. Please, draw your own conclusions. I attached the file, and I hit send. They say the truth will set you free, but sometimes you have to gather it, organize it, and weaponize it first. If you believe in the power of holding up a mirror to the people who hurt you, even if your hand is shaking, write truth in the comments as a show of support. In that moment, it was no longer their story to tell. It was mine. After I hit send, my inbox exploded. For about 24 hours, there was a flurry of activity-confused texts, a few angry calls from my parents, which I sent straight to voicemail, and even a couple of quiet, apologetic emails from cousins who said they'd had no idea. My cousin Robert called and simply said, "I'm sorry, Ellie, we should have listened to you." I thanked him, but I didn't engage further. My email wasn't an invitation to a debate. It was a eulogy for a relationship that was already dead. And then, a true and lasting silence fell. The whisper campaign died because the facts were too loud. I blocked the last remaining numbers and, for the first time in my adult life, I felt the profound peace of being truly free from their judgment. We spent the next few months in that quiet freedom. Leo poured all of his energy into his college applications, the very portfolio he had been working on that Saturday my parents came to the door. He worked with a focus and a lightness I hadn't seen in him before, his art becoming bolder, more confident. In March, a thick envelope arrived from the Rhode Island School of Design, his dream school. It wasn't just an acceptance letter, it was an offer for the presidential scholarship. I found him in his room later that day, just holding the letter, a look of quiet awe on his face. He looked up at me, his eyes shining. They wanted their Whitmore legacy portrait, he said. I guess this is mine. He stood up and hugged me, a real, tight hug that spoke volumes. Thanks for always being in my corner, Mom. Especially when it was the hardest. We had weathered the storm, and on the other side, we hadn't just survived. We were thriving. Leo getting that scholarship wasn't just a personal victory for him. It was a testament to our new reality. It was proof that when you remove a plant from toxic soil and place it in the sun, it doesn't just survive, it blooms. His success was the ultimate validation of our choice. 5 months later, I was helping him move into his dorm room in Providence, the air thick with the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. We unpacked his art supplies, his books, his entire world condensed into cardboard boxes. When it was finally time for me to leave, he walked me to the door of his building and gave me a long hug. He pulled back and looked at me, his expression serious. You know, they said I'd go off to college and you'd be alone. He said, his voice quiet, referencing that awful day on the porch. They thought you'd come crawling back to them. He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. They really don't get it, do they? This was never about you losing me. This was about us choosing us. Driving home from Rhode Island that afternoon, with an empty passenger seat and a full heart, I thought about that old saying my aunt had thrown at me, blood is thicker than water. People use it to justify staying shackled to toxic family dynamics. But they've forgotten the original meaning of the phrase. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds you choose, the promises you make, the family you build, that is the covenant. Leo is my covenant. The love we built together is thicker, stronger, and more real than any accident of birth. They were my relatives, but he is my family. And that choice, the choice to honor my covenant, was the single greatest act of my life. So, that's my story. It's about a boy and his mother, yes, but it's also about that covenant, the sacred promise we must make to ourselves and to the people we truly love, the ones who see us and cherish us for who we are. For years, I believed that peace was the absence of conflict. I thought it meant biting my tongue, absorbing the 1,000 tiny cuts, and keeping a strained smile on my face for the sake of family. I was wrong. True peace is not the absence of tension, it is the presence of boundaries. It's the quiet, unshakable strength to say, no more. You do not get to hurt us here. Closing that door to my parents wasn't an act of hate. It was the ultimate act of love for my son, and for the woman I was finally allowing myself to become. We are taught that loyalty to the family we are born into is a paramount virtue, but we are rarely taught that the first family you must be loyal to is the one you build. The one with your children, your partner, your truest friends. The family that breathes life into you, instead of slowly suffocating you with conditions and expectations. My life is quieter now, but it's not empty. It's full. It's filled with authentic laughter, with friends who show up, and with nightly calls from my son at college, who is excelling in the beautiful, safe world we fought to protect. I shared this very personal story because I know, with certainty, that someone listening right now needed to hear it. You are not a villain for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for drawing a line in the sand. You are a warrior. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the profound power of choosing your family and writing your own ending, then please, hit that subscribe button and become part of this community. Let's continue to be brave together. Thank you for listening.